The complete history of Egypta. Picture this: small group of people huddled along a river, trying to survive in a harsh desert. Fast forward 5,000 years, and their descendants built pyramids that still stand today, created one of the world's first great civilizations, and influenced every culture that came after them. How did a scattered tribe along the Nile become modern Egypt, home to over 100 million people? This is not just a story about pharaohs and pyramids. This is the story of how geography, religion, conquest, and resilience transformed a river valley into one of the most important nations on earth. From tribe to nation, the complete history of Egypt. Part 1. Ancient Era. From scattered tribes to eternal civilization. The beginning. Prehistoric Egypt. Our story begins around 10,000 BCE. The Sahara wasn't always a desert. It was once green, filled with lakes and grasslands. But as the climate changed and the land dried up, people were forced to migrate. They moved toward the one constant source of water, the Nile River. These weren't Egyptians yet. They were nomadic tribes, hunter-gatherers who followed animal herds and seasonal rains. But the Nile offered something different: predictability. Every year, like clockwork, the river flooded, leaving behind rich, black soil perfect for farming. By 5000 BCE, these tribes began settling permanently along the riverbanks. They developed agriculture, growing wheat and barley. They domesticated animals. They built permanent villages. But they were still divided, isolated communities with no central authority. The birth of two kingdoms. By 3500 BCE, something remarkable happened. These scattered villages began organizing into two distinct kingdoms. In the north, where the Nile spreads into a delta before meeting the Mediterranean Sea, emerged Lower Egypt. Its symbol was the red crown, and its patron goddess was the cobra Wadjet. In the south, stretching along the narrow river valley, was Upper Egypt. Its symbol was the white crown, and its patron goddess was the vulture Nekhbet. These kingdoms had different cultures, different gods, different rulers. They traded, they fought, they competed. But around 3100 BCE, everything changed. A king from Upper Egypt named Nama, also known as Mens, did what seemed impossible. He conquered Lower Egypt and unified the two kingdoms into one nation. He wore both crowns, one inside the other, creating the double crown of unified Egypt. This wasn't just a military conquest. This was the birth of one of history's first nation-states. The birth of Egypt. The Old Kingdom, the Pyramid Age. The period from 2686 to 2181 BCE is called the Old Kingdom, but history remembers it as the Age of Pyramids. Under the Third Dynasty, King Dosa and his architect Imhotep built something the world had never seen, the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. It was the first large-scale stone building in human history, rising 200 feet into the sky. But that was just the beginning. The Fourth Dynasty pharaohs took this concept to unimaginable heights. Pharaoh Khufu built the Great Pyramid of Giza around 2560 BCE. Picture this: 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing about 2.5 tons, precisely cut and fitted together. It stood 481 feet tall, making it the tallest man-made structure in the world for 3,800 years. How did they do it? Forget the myths about aliens or slaves with whips. Recent evidence shows that skilled workers, paid laborers, built these monuments. They lived in workers' villages, received rations of beer and bread, and were proud to serve their god-king. Because that's what the pharaoh was, not just a king, but a living god. The son of Ra, the sun god. When Pharaoh spoke, he spoke with divine authority. The pyramids weren't just tombs. They were statements of cosmic order, physical manifestations of Egypt's place between earth and heaven. During this period, Egyptian society developed its distinctive character. At the top was the pharaoh. Below him were nobles and priests who administered his will. Then came scribes, who kept records in the beautiful hieroglyphic writing system. Below them were craftsmen, artists, farmers, and laborers. But around 2181 BCE, the Old Kingdom collapsed. Climate change reduced the Nile floods. Famine spread. Regional governors became powerful enough to challenge the pharaoh's authority. Egypt fractured into competing territories. This period, called the First Intermediate Period, showed that even the greatest civilizations are fragile. The Middle Kingdom, reunification and Golden Age. Out of chaos came order. Around 2055 BCE, Pharaoh Mentuhotep II reunified Egypt, beginning the Middle Kingdom. This era, lasting until about 1650 BCE, is considered Egypt's classical age. Literature flourished. Art became more naturalistic. The pharaohs were now seen not just as distant gods, but as shepherds of their people. The Tale of Sinew, written during this period, is one of world literature's earliest masterpieces. Wisdom texts taught virtue and proper behavior. Mathematics and engineering advanced dramatically. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs expanded Egypt's borders. They conquered Nubia to the south, controlling gold mines and trade routes. They built fortresses, established diplomatic relations, and created the world's first professional standing army. But Egypt's greatest strength was also its weakness. Its wealth attracted invaders. Around 1650 BCE, a people called the Hyksos, possibly from Syria-Palestine, migrated into the Nile Delta. They brought new military technology, the horse-drawn chariot, composite bows, and improved bronze weapons. Within decades, they controlled much of northern Egypt. For over a century, Egypt was divided again. But this humiliation would fuel Egypt's greatest period of expansion. Dramatic music build. The New Kingdom, Empire and Power, 028 to 035. Narrator, the New Kingdom, from 1550 to 1077 BCE, transformed Egypt from a regional power into an international empire. I drove out the Hyksos around 1550 BCE, but Egyptian pharaohs learned a lesson. Never again would they allow foreign powers to threaten their borders. The solution: expand. Thutmose III, who ruled from 1479 to 1425 BCE, was Egypt's Napoleon. He led at least 17 military campaigns, conquering lands from Nubia to Syria. Egyptian armies marched as far as the Euphrates River. Tribute poured into Egypt from vassal states. Gold, slaves, exotic animals, and precious goods flooded Egyptian cities. This was also the age of Egypt's most famous rulers. Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs, ruled from about 1479 to 1458 BCE. She declared herself king, even wearing the false beard of pharaonic authority. Rather than military conquest, she focused on trade expeditions and building projects. Her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari still stands today. Then came Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh. Around 1353 BCE, he did something radical. He abandoned Egypt's traditional gods and declared that only one god existed, the Aten, the sun disk. He moved the capital to a new city, Amarna, and tried to erase thousands of years of religious tradition. It failed. After his death, his son, Tutankhamun, that young pharaoh whose golden mask would mesmerize the world 3,000 years later, restored the old gods. Akhenaten's name was erased from official records. The new kingdom's power peaked under Ramesses II, who ruled for 66 years from 1279 to 1213 BCE. He fought the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, one of history's largest chariot battles. Though tactically inconclusive, Ramesses declared it a great victory and signed history's first recorded peace treaty with the Hittites. Ramesses built more monuments than any other pharaoh. The massive temples at Abu Simbel, with 4 67-foot statues of himself carved into a cliff face, still inspire awe today. But even great empires decline. After Ramesses II's death, Egypt faced invasions from the Sea Peoples, mysterious raiders who collapsed civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE. Egypt survived, but was weakened. By 1077 BCE, the new kingdom ended. Egypt entered another period of division and foreign rule. Part 2. Medieval period, foreign rule, religion, and transformation. The third intermediate period and late period. Narrator. For the next 700 years, from 1077 to 332 BCE, Egypt was rarely unified under native rule. The third intermediate period saw Egypt split between competing dynasties. Libyan military commanders, Nubian kings from Kush, and even Assyrian conquerors ruled parts of Egypt. In 671 BCE, the Assyrian Empire conquered Egypt, the first time in over 1,500 years that Egypt fell completely to a foreign power. Though Assyrian rule was brief, it marked a turning point. Egypt's age of dominance was over. The 26th dynasty, ruling from 664 to 525 BCE, briefly reunified Egypt under native rule. They looked back to Egypt's golden age, copying old kingdom art and architecture. But this was nostalgia, not genuine revival. In 525 BCE, the Persian Empire under Cambyses II conquered Egypt. For over a century, Egypt was a Persian province. The Persians respected Egyptian culture but ruled with an iron fist. Egyptian revolts were brutally suppressed. But in 332 BCE, everything changed when a young Macedonian king arrived. Alexander and the Ptolemies. Greece meets Egypt. Alexander the Great marched into Egypt in 332 BCE, and the Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. Alexander respected Egyptian traditions, sacrificing to Egyptian gods and visiting the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, where he was proclaimed the son of Amun. Alexander founded Alexandria, which would become one of the ancient world's greatest cities. But Alexander didn't stay long. He continued east to conquer Persia, and died in Babylon in 323 BCE at age 32. His empire was divided among his generals. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted companions, claimed Egypt. He established the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would rule Egypt for 300 years. The Ptolemies were Greek, but they adopted Egyptian customs. They portrayed themselves as pharaohs, built temples to Egyptian gods, and even married their siblings, following pharaonic tradition. But they spoke Greek, promoted Greek culture, and made Alexandria a center of Hellenistic learning. The Library of Alexandria, founded by the Ptolemies, housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, attracting scholars from across the Mediterranean. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, guided ships into the harbor. But the Ptolemaic dynasty was marked by intrigue, civil wars, and gradual decline. Brothers fought sisters for the throne. By the 1st century BCE, Egypt was wealthy but weak, caught between feuding royal factions. Then came Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra and Rome. The end of ancient Egypt. Cleopatra VII became queen in 51 BCE at age 18. She was intelligent, educated, and politically brilliant. Unlike her Ptolemaic ancestors, she actually learned to speak Egyptian. But Egypt was surrounded by a rising power, Rome. When civil war erupted in Rome between Julius Caesar and Pompey, Cleopatra saw opportunity. She seduced Caesar, not just for romance, but for political survival. With Caesar's support, she secured her throne. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra aligned herself with Mark Antony, one of Rome's new rulers. They became lovers and political partners, planning to create a new empire that would unite East and West. But Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, had other plans. He portrayed Antony as a traitor seduced by an Oriental temptress. In 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, Octavian's fleet defeated Antony and Cleopatra's combined forces. A year later, with Octavian's armies at Alexandria's gates, Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide. Egypt became a Roman province. After 3,000 years, Pharaonic Egypt was over. Roman and Byzantine Egypt, a new identity under Roman rule, Egypt became Rome's breadbasket. Egyptian grain fed the Roman Empire. Wealth flowed from Egypt to Rome. But a new force was emerging, Christianity. According to tradition, Saint Mark the Evangelist brought Christianity to Egypt around 42 CE. The new religion spread rapidly among Egyptians. By the 3rd century CE, Christianity dominated Egypt, especially among native Egyptians who resented Greek and Roman cultural dominance. The Coptic Church, Egypt's native Christian church, developed its own theology and language. Coptic, the final evolution of the ancient Egyptian language written in a modified Greek alphabet, became the language of Egyptian Christianity. When the Roman Empire split in 395 CE, Egypt became part of the Byzantine Empire, ruled from Constantinople. But tensions grew between Egyptian Christians and Byzantine authorities over theological disputes. The Council of Chalcedon in 451 CE declared Coptic beliefs heretical. Egypt was religiously persecuted by fellow Christians, heavily taxed, and culturally suppressed. By the 7th century, many Egyptians saw Byzantine rule as oppressive as any foreign occupation. Then, in 639 CE, Arab armies arrived carrying a new message, Islam. Part 3, Early Modern, Islamic Conquest to Ottoman Rule. The Arab Conquest and Islamic Egypt. Narrator, in 639 CE, Arab general Amr ibn al-As led 4,000 cavalry into Egypt. The Byzantine garrison was unprepared. Many Coptic Egyptians, tired of Byzantine persecution, welcomed the Arabs or remained neutral. By 642 CE, Egypt was under Islamic rule. The Arabs established a new capital, Fustat, near modern Cairo. They offered Egyptians a choice: convert to Islam, remain Christian and pay a tax, or resist. Most Egyptians initially remained Christian, but over centuries, many converted to Islam. Why? Islam offered social mobility. Arabic became the language of government and commerce. Muslims paid lower taxes. Intermarriage between Arabs and Egyptians created a new hybrid culture. By the 9th century, Arabic had largely replaced Coptic as Egypt's spoken language. By the 12th century, Muslims formed the majority. Modern Egyptians are not Arabs who conquered Egypt. They are the descendants of ancient Egyptians who adopted Arab culture and Islam. Egypt became part of the Umayyad Caliphate, then the Abbasid Caliphate. But distance from the Caliphate center in Baghdad gave Egyptian governors increasing autonomy. In 969 CE, the Fatimid Caliphate conquered Egypt. The Fatimids were Shia Muslims who claimed descent from Muhammad's daughter Fatima. They built a new capital, Cairo, which means the victorious. The Fatimids made Cairo into a magnificent city. They founded Al-Azhar Mosque in 970 CE, which became one of Islam's most important centers of learning and remains so today. But the Fatimid Empire weakened. In the 12th century, Crusaders from Europe attacked the Middle East, conquering Jerusalem and threatening Egypt. Saladin and the Ayyubids, defender of Islam. In 1171, a Kurdish general named Salah ad-Din, known to the West as Saladin, overthrew the Fatimid dynasty and established the Ayyubid dynasty. Saladin became Islam's greatest hero. In 1187, he recaptured Jerusalem from the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin. Dramatic transition. The Mamluks, slave soldiers who became kings. Here's where Egypt's story takes a surprising turn. The Ayyubid sultans had formed an elite military force of slave soldiers called Mamluks. These weren't ordinary slaves. They were usually boys from the Caucasus or Central Asia, purchased young, converted to Islam, and trained as warriors. In 1250, these Mamluks seized power, establishing the Mamluk Sultanate. In 1260, at the Battle of Ain Jalut, the Mamluks achieved what seemed impossible. They defeated the Mongols, stopping their westward expansion. This victory secured the Mamluk Sultanate as the Islamic world's dominant military power. For 267 years, Mamluks ruled Egypt. They weren't a dynasty in the traditional sense. Succession wasn't hereditary. When a sultan died, Mamluk commanders fought for power. The strongest became the new sultan. Despite political instability, the Mamluk period was culturally golden. Cairo became the largest city west of China. The Mamluks built stunning mosques, madrasas, and palaces. Trade flourished. Merchants from across Africa, Asia, and Europe came to Cairo's bazaars. But in the early 16th century, a new power emerged, the Ottoman Empire. Ominous music. The Ottoman conquest. The Ottomans, ruling from Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, had conquered much of the Middle East and Eastern Europe. In 1516, Ottoman Sultan Selim I marched south. At the Battle of Marj Daybik in Syria, the Ottomans' gunpowder weapons devastated the Mamluk cavalry. The Mamluk Sultan was killed. The Ottomans marched into Egypt. In 1517, at the Battle of Ridania outside Cairo, the Mamluks made their last stand. They were crushed. Cairo fell, and Egypt became an Ottoman province. But Ottoman rule was different from previous conquests. The Ottomans allowed Mamluks to remain as a ruling class under Ottoman supervision. Egypt was governed by an Ottoman viceroy, but day-to-day administration was handled by Mamluk beys. This created a strange situation. Egypt was officially Ottoman, but Mamluks retained significant power. Over time, the Mamluks grew stronger while the Ottomans, distracted by wars in Europe, grew weaker. By the 18th century, Egypt was effectively independent again under Mamluk rule, paying only nominal tribute to Istanbul. But Egypt's strategic location made it too valuable to remain isolated. In 1798, a European power arrived with revolutionary ideas and modern armies. Part 4: Modern Era, Colonialism, Nationalism, and Independence. Napoleon's invasion and the birth of modern Egypt. On July 1, 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte landed in Egypt with 36,000 troops. His goal: cut Britain's route to India, establish a French empire in the east, and perhaps even march to Istanbul. The Mamluks were caught completely off guard. At the Battle of the Pyramids on July 21, French disciplined infantry formations and artillery massacred Mamluk cavalry charges. Cairo fell within days. Napoleon brought something unusual: 167 scientists, engineers, and scholars. They studied everything about Egypt, its antiquities, geography, people, and culture. The result was the Description de l'Egypte, a massive encyclopedia that sparked European fascination with ancient Egypt. Napoleon's expedition discovered the Rosetta Stone, which would eventually unlock the secrets of hieroglyphic writing. But Napoleon's Egyptian adventure failed. The British destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Ottoman and British forces attacked. In 1799, Napoleon secretly returned to France, abandoning his army. The French finally evacuated Egypt in 1801. Egypt was in chaos, with Ottomans, Mamluks, and British all competing for control. Out of this chaos rose an unlikely figure, an Albanian tobacco merchant's son who became Egypt's greatest modernizer. Hopeful music. Muhammad Ali, the father of modern Egypt. Muhammad Ali arrived in Egypt in 1801 as a low-ranking Ottoman officer. Through political skill and ruthlessness, he became Egypt's governor by 1805. In 1811, he dealt with the Mamluk problem decisively. He invited Mamluk leaders to Cairo citadel for a feast. As they left through a narrow passage, his soldiers opened fire from above. Hundreds of Mamluks were massacred. The rest were hunted down across Egypt. After 800 years, the Mamluks were finished. Muhammad Ali then transformed Egypt. He reorganized the army along European lines. He sent students to study in France. He invited European advisors to modernize Egypt's administration, education, and industry. He seized agricultural land, introducing cash crops like long staple cotton that made Egypt wealthy. He built factories, modernized Alexandria, and created a powerful navy. But his greatest legacy was ambition. Muhammad Ali's armies conquered Sudan, Syria, and much of Arabia. By the 1830s, Egypt challenged Ottoman power directly. In 1839, Egyptian forces defeated the Ottoman army at the Battle of Nezib. Constantinople seemed ready to fall. But European powers, especially Britain and Russia, couldn't allow Egypt to become too powerful. They forced Muhammad Ali to withdraw from Syria and reduce his army. Still, the Ottomans granted him and his descendants hereditary rule over Egypt. The dynasty he founded would rule until 1952. The Suez Canal and British occupation. Muhammad Ali's grandson, Khedive Ismail, had grand ambitions. His slogan was, "My country is no longer in Africa, we are now part of Europe." His greatest project was the Suez Canal, connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. French engineer Ferdinand de Lesseps convinced Ismail to support it. From 1859 to 1869, tens of thousands of Egyptian laborists dug through 120 miles of desert. When it opened in 1869, the Suez Canal was a marvel. Ships could now travel from Europe to Asia without sailing around Africa. Egypt's strategic importance skyrocketed. But the canal's cost bankrupted Egypt. Ismail borrowed heavily from European banks at punishing interest rates. In 1875, desperate for cash, he sold Egypt's shares in the canal to Britain. By 1876, Egypt was essentially bankrupt. European creditors took control of Egypt's finances. When Egyptian military officers, led by Colonel Ahmed Urabi, rebelled against foreign control in 1882, Britain intervened militarily. At the Battle of Tel el-Keba, British forces crushed the Egyptian army. Britain occupied Egypt, claiming it was temporary. The occupation would last 72 years. Egypt remained nominally part of the Ottoman Empire, with a Khedive on the throne, but real power lay with the British Consul General. Britain controlled Egypt's government, economy, and foreign policy. The Suez Canal, Britain's lifeline to India, was the reason. Part 5. The Struggle for Independence and Modern Egypt. World War I and 1919 Revolution. When World War I began in 1914, Britain formally declared Egypt a protectorate, ending the fiction of Ottoman sovereignty. Egypt became a base for British operations against the Ottomans. Egyptians were forced to provide labor, supplies, and resources for the war effort. Over 1.5 million Egyptians were conscripted for labor. Inflation skyrocketed. Egyptians suffered while British authorities profited. When the war ended in 1918, Egyptians expected independence. After all, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson had proclaimed the right of all peoples to self-determination. A delegation, or waft in Arabic, led by nationalist leader Saad Zaghloul, asked to present Egypt's case at the Paris Peace Conference. The British refused. When Zaghloul persisted, the British arrested him and exiled him to Malta. This sparked the 1919 revolution. Protests erupted across Egypt. Students, workers, peasants, Muslims, and Coptic Christians united. Women joined demonstrations. The British responded with violence, killing hundreds. The revolution forced Britain's hand. In 1922, Britain declared Egypt nominally independent, though British troops remained and Britain retained control over defense, foreign affairs, and the Suez Canal. Egypt had a king, Fuad I, and later his son Farouk, and a parliament, but British influence remained overwhelming. Tension builds. World War II and the road to true independence, 153 to 155. World War II brought Egypt back into the spotlight. The Western Desert became a battlefield as British and German forces fought for control of North Africa and the Suez Canal. The war didn't devastate Egypt like Europe or Asia, but it highlighted Egypt's continued subordination to British interests. When King Farouk seemed too friendly with Axis powers, British tanks surrounded his palace in 1942, forcing him to appoint a pro-British government. This humiliation radicalized young Egyptian army officers. They saw their king as a British puppet and the entire system as corrupt. After the war, Egyptian nationalism intensified. In 1948, Egypt joined other Arab states in attacking the newly declared State of Israel. The war was a disaster for Egypt and the Arab armies. The defeat humiliated Egypt's military and government. Part 6. Modern Egypt. Revolution to present day, the 1952 Revolution and Nasser's era. On July 23, 1952, a group of army officers called the Free Officers Movement staged a coup. They were led by General Mohammed Naguib, but the real power was Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser. King Farouk was forced to abdicate. He sailed into exile on his yacht, ending 150 years of his dynasty's rule. In 1954, Nasser emerged as Egypt's undisputed leader. He had a vision: pan-Arab nationalism, socialism, and complete independence from Western powers. In 1956, Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, declaring that its revenues would fund Egypt's development, including the Aswan High Dam. Britain, France, and Israel responded with military invasion. But the world had changed. The United States and Soviet Union, despite their Cold War rivalry, both condemned the invasion. International pressure forced Britain, France, and Israel to withdraw. Nasser had won. A developing nation had stood up to former colonial powers and prevailed. Nasser became a hero across the Arab world and the developing world. Nasser implemented socialist policies, nationalizing industries, redistributing land, and providing free education and healthcare. He suppressed political opposition, including the Muslim Brotherhood, creating an authoritarian state. In 1967, tensions with Israel exploded. The Six-Day War was a catastrophic defeat. Israel destroyed Egypt's air force, occupied the Sinai Peninsula, and humiliated Egypt militarily. Nasser offered to resign, but massive demonstrations demanded he stay. He remained in power until his death in 1970. Solemn transition. Sadat, Camp David, and assassination. Anwar Sadat succeeded Nasser and shocked the world. In 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel on Yom Kippur. Though militarily inconclusive, the war restored Egyptian dignity. Then Sadat did the unthinkable. In 1977, he flew to Jerusalem and addressed the Israeli parliament, beginning a peace process. In 1978, at Camp David, Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin signed a peace treaty. Egypt got the Sinai back, but Sadat was denounced across the Arab world as a traitor. In 1981, members of Egyptian Islamic Jihad assassinated him during a military parade. Mubarak, the 2011 revolution, and today. Hosni Mubarak, Sadat's vice president, became president and ruled for 30 years. His regime was stable but autocratic, marked by corruption and political repression. In 2011, inspired by Tunisia's Jasmine Revolution, Egyptians filled Tahrir Square demanding freedom, dignity, and justice. After 18 days of protests, Mubarak resigned. Egypt's first free election brought Mohammed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood to power in 2012. But his rule was divisive and brief. In 2013, mass protests erupted again. The military, led by General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, removed Morsi from power. Sisi became president in 2014 and remains in power today. His government emphasizes stability and development but has been criticized for authoritarianism and human rights violations. Today, Egypt faces enormous challenges: a population of over 100 million, water scarcity, economic pressures, and political tensions. Yet Egypt remains one of the Arab world's most influential nations, a bridge between Africa and Asia, and heir to one of history's greatest civilizations. Ending. How history shaped today's Egypt. So how did a small tribe along the Nile become modern Egypt? Ancient Egyptians created a civilization that valued order, cosmic balance, and monumental achievement. That legacy of resilience endures. Foreign conquerors, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Ottomans, British, each left their mark, creating the layered, complex Egyptian identity that exists today. Islam and the Arabic language, adopted over centuries, became core to Egyptian identity, while Coptic Christians maintained a living link to Egypt's pre-Islamic past. Colonialism and the struggle for independence forged modern Egyptian nationalism and the desire for dignity and self-determination that drove the 1952 revolution and the 2011 uprising. Geography. The Nile, the Suez Canal, Egypt's position between Africa and Asia, made Egypt too important for others to ignore, shaping its modern role in Middle Eastern politics. Today's Egypt is the product of 5,000 years of adaptation, resistance, and transformation. From tribe to pharaonic civilization, from Hellenistic kingdom to Islamic sultanate, from Ottoman province to British colony to independent nation, Egypt has survived because Egyptians have repeatedly reinvented themselves while maintaining a deep connection to their land and history. That ancient tribe along the Nile didn't just become modern Egypt. They became one of humanity's most enduring stories, a testament to human resilience, creativity, and the power of place.